In this episode, I am going to be interviewing Dr. Elizabeth Collins all about burnout and how burnout can be recognised, the strategies that we can put in place to prevent burnout, and also if you're feeling burnt out, the strategies that you can follow to help get you on your path to recovery. Dr. Elizabeth Collins is a burnout recovery expert, professionally known as the Burnout Witch. She uses her combined backgrounds in both Eastern and biomedicines, including functional medicine, acupuncture, and Chinese herbal medicine, hypnosis, and more, to approach healing from a perspective that seeks to fully integrate the mind, body, and spirit. After experiencing and recovering from burnout, she made it her mission to help others identify their values, explore their boundaries, and bring a sense of balance to both their body and brain. When she's not working with clients, she's voraciously consuming all forms of music, reading, sharpening her tarot card skills, and crafting custom cocktails from random ingredients in her pantry. Welcome to Bloggers Creating Courses, the podcast which will take you behind the scenes of creating an online course. I'm your host, Verity Songon, founder and education consultant of veritysongon.com. I'm so excited to help you create an online course that you are proud of and to be part of your journey to scale your business as an online course creator. Let's get into the episode. I am so excited to have you on the podcast. So thank you very much for coming on. I think the most exciting bit, and I'm not sure if I told you this yet, you're my first guest on the podcast.
I didn't know. That's so exciting.
It is really exciting for me. I woke up this morning and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm interviewing my first podcast guest today. So yeah, you can take that as like a celebratory thing that you're my first podcast guest. So
I'm so flattered. This is so fun.
And welcome to the show. I'm so excited to have you, and I'm really excited about what we're going to talk about today. I know that we've got loads and loads of stuff that we want to cover, but first of all, I'm just going to throw it over to you. Tell me who you are, what you do. Just tell me everything about you.
Yeah. So if you're listening to this, you probably know already, my name is Eliza Collins, and I am professionally known as the Burnout Witch. And I specialize in burnout recovery, functional medicine, hypnosis, and mindset work. And I got into that after building an integrated medicine practice that started with acupuncture in 2014. Really not in alignment with my own wants or needs or values as an individual, just kind of building my business in this world of entrepreneurship and doing so the way that I thought I was supposed to based on how everybody else said you build a successful business. It's really not a great model. And I ended up burning out severely in the process of that. And I started to address that in 2019. And so throughout the process of my recovery, it became very apparent that my coach was kind of in this realm and basically saying, like, we need more people in this realm, and you've got the skills to do this. You actually fit a really interesting and unique niche because you've got the biomedical side of things and the functional medicine side of things. You've got the Eastern medicine from your acupuncture and herbal training. And then you're just kind of this like little weird esoteric, gardenia in a pot of daisies. So like, go be a weird flower and do something cool and help people recover from burnout.
I love that. That is just this little something in a pile of daisies. I think that is just the best compliment. I hope that's on your CV somewhere.
That was actually something that a gentleman named Paul Selig said to me last year when I was trying to sort of wrap my head around what my business was going to look like. He said, you're trying to plant yourself in this pot with a bunch of other, coaches and things like that. And there's all sorts of niches. He goes, but you're a weird, strange little flower. So put yourself in a pot and say, look at the strange flower that I am. So I took it as a huge compliment.
So much. I take that. I was going to say, that has got Instagram quote written all over it. It's like, I'm going to go play on Canva later and turn that into an Instagram quote. I love that so much.
Oh, you have a Canva addiction as well. I knew we were going to get along.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, I'm so glad that we're going to talk about burnout, because initially, I know initially when I kind of reached out to you and it was like, oh, online courses, but I think that when people start creating online courses, they start their online course business, or maybe they've already got their business, they've already got their blogging business or whatever it is, and they're looking at creating an online course. There's just kind of, how we describe it is all the things. There's everything going on. And I was in a Facebook forum just earlier today. Facebook forum sounds a little bit 2001, doesn't it? But Facebook group just earlier, and really, really timely, because somebody was saying, I'm trying to set up my first online course, and I've got to do this. I've got to think about landing pages and sales leads and email marketing. And you could see, like, as I was reading the post, I could just see the frustration and the burnout that was going on. So I thought, actually, this is incredibly timely for this episode. So I'm really, really excited that we're talking about it, because I think, particularly with things like the pandemic that's gone on, we're pushing ourselves more and more, which is great. But the more we push ourselves, the more we've got that potential for burnout. So I'm going to throw it over to you. And can you tell me exactly what burnout is? Because we hear the word or the term burnout thrown around so much, but what is burnout and how can we recognize it in ourselves?
That's a really great question. And I love when people want to kind of start there, because it really does unpack it from the ground up. And burnout is for a while, it was kind of a buzzword, and it had originally been identified kind of in like the medical community. So for people who were working super long shifts, doctors and nurses, people who, residents who, I don't know how it is in other countries, but residency in the United States, you can work 24, 36-hour shifts. And it was really, really nutty. And so they were identifying burnout in that population. But as we've kind of grown and expanded from a cultural perspective, burnout can happen any place. It can happen in the financial sector. It can happen in entrepreneurship. I challenge anybody to talk to a parent and talk about burnout. And parents will tell you, yes, like that is a literal full-time job 24/7. So one of the ways that we think about burnout is basically it is chronic prolonged stress that affects your brain and your body in such a way that you can no longer respond to day-to-day stresses in a normal way without feeling overwhelmed, without feeling overburdened, without feeling run down. So it's this sort of long-term chronic stress that leads to that. It's not usually something where it's like this aha moment and all of a sudden you're burnt out. It's something that builds up over time, which can make it very difficult to identify, particularly in a modern culture when everything is kind of hustle and grind. For the perspective of entrepreneurship, people building courses, like you are your market, you're your brand. So it's your whole life in a way. And when we talk about wanting authenticity and really putting yourself out there, like people are putting a lot into what they do, and it can create this bubble of stress that can be very difficult to get outside of. And one of the things that can be kind of difficult is some people say, like, what's the difference between depression and burnout? They can happen at the same time. They don't have to. For me personally, depression wasn't necessarily tied to anything. So it just kind of felt like a weighted blanket that kind of held me down in every aspect of my life. Whereas when I was burnt out, I have a tendency to depression. So I was very depressed when I was burnt out, but I could tie my feelings of frustration and resentment and fatigue to specific things in my life, and particularly things that weren't quote unquote supposed to burn me out, because there's that old adage of if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life. I hate that phrase because it makes you think that the thing that you love, that you put your heart and your soul into, that's your passion, shouldn't stress you out. But it can, and it does, without boundaries and without, proper self-care and without community support. So that's sort of the big overview of what burnout is.
100%. And I think you encapsulated that so nicely there. And I loved what you said as well about, if you do what you love, then you never have to work a day in your life. Because I think sometimes, we hit up on social media, particularly Instagram, we see all these fantastic quotes. And I think it's really easy for us to start thinking, but I do what I love, and I love my business, and I love what my business is all about. But actually today was really hard, or this week was really hard because maybe I didn't sell as many courses as I wanted, or I didn't get as many leads generated, or whatever it is that our target was. And you're right, we don't always tie that all in and think, well, actually sometimes we almost need to take a step back just to go forward, almost, if that makes sense. But Yeah, it's really, really interesting. Such an interesting concept. And I really like how you tied into depression there as well, because again, it's another term that gets bandied around so much. And like you said, it's really important to recognize that they are two standalone things, essentially. Yes, they can have that effect on each other, but they are two standalone things. What I really want to dive into now, because I really want to pick up on, that medical background that you've got, and, all those different fantastic skills and experiences you've got. And I know that you've got that information about that physical underpinnings of burnout. So can we talk about that? And what are those physical underpinnings of burnout that can occur in people?
Yeah, that's kind of one of my favorite places to work. And it's usually one of the first places that I start with people when I'm doing coaching with them, or, even when I'm doing some of my other modalities, like just functional medicine or even acupuncture. A lot of times the physical symptoms of burnout aren't catastrophic. They're not the sort of things that like lay you out fatigue that lays you out in bed for a week where you just like can't drag yourself off of the floor. It's just, you're not optimal. Like you can always have more energy, a little bit more energy. It's not that the battery is fully drained. It's just that it never gets past 60, 65%. Brain fog. When I was in the height of my burnout, I would lose words, and I love language. So to not have access to information as quickly, or like, I remember at the height of my burnout, I became completely enraged because I was trying to open the door to my apartment with the automatic button for my car key. So I was trying to open my house door with my car keys with an automatic button. And I was like literally screaming, like, why isn't it working? And it was just like, it's not even the right structure. And you don't open your house door with, like this was pre like Nest cameras and key fobs and things like that. So it's moments like that where there's just an inability to kind of think clearly. There's not a whole lot of energy, gut issues that again aren't catastrophic, but are problematic. Like you used to be able to kind of eat everything, and now certain things set you off, or you're feeling like I just don't digest my food well. Like nothing feels good. I'm always bloated. Insomnia is one too. Tired but wired is something that we talk a lot about in the burnout community, where you're so fatigued at the end of the day and you're so grateful to like lay down, and your body's like, yes, give me 8 hours. And your brain is like, cool. Do you remember that thing that happened in 7th grade? What do we have to do tomorrow? What do we have to do next week? It's that constant reel that just keeps going and going and going in your head. So these are the type of things that people often see with burnout. And again, like I said, they're not necessarily catastrophic, but together they create this kind of special little storm that means you are living an extraordinarily suboptimal life, even though it doesn't necessarily look like it from the outside. People are just like, oh, well, like everybody develops gluten sensitivity past a certain point. It's like, do they? So that's some of the stuff that I often see with people who complain about burnout.
Absolutely. I think that's so interesting, because I wonder as well how many people are going to be listening to what you've just said now and thinking, oh, actually, maybe I do need to like hit Google, or I need to, have a little look at this a little bit more, because I'm starting to recognize myself in those symptoms that you've just described. And I think it's also remembering that we're all at risk of burnout as well. I think particularly in the world that we live in, particularly with our online businesses and whatever it is that we do in the digital world, because I know that we've talked about this before, kind of that quote unquote doing all the things, it's, I have to be on Instagram, I have to be on TikTok, oh my gosh, have I shared to Facebook recently? And have I got my blog post up? Did I submit to Google Console? I don't know, I'm just pulling stuff out of the air, but it's all these things. And yeah, do we ever kind of sit down and, like you said, at the end of the day, properly switch off? Are we lying in bed absolutely exhausted, but our brain is just going bing, 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 and creating a memo list for the next day, that then it doesn't get to the next day because you pull out your phone 5 minutes later, and you're not helping yourself at all then, I suppose. And, you get to breakfast the next day, and like you said, you're not enjoying those foods that you normally enjoy and what have you. So yeah, I'll be interested to know how many people resonate with those symptoms that you just described there.
That is part of that piece of chronic stress is when we don't shut down, we don't give our body an opportunity to get into its own natural rhythms.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we think about like cortisol as a stress hormone. Cortisol isn't just something that kicks around in your body all the time. It has a rhythm. It has a 24-hour rhythm. You know, our bodies are designed to work within the rhythms of nature, which is something that, you know, my Eastern medicine training taught me years before I got into functional medicine. And so when we are in this period of chronic stress, that can result in our cortisol levels going up, 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 and staying up.
Mm-hmm.
That does not allow you to digest your food properly. So even if you wake up, if you're in that headspace of, you know, put my feet on the ground and get going, your body is not working with a rhythm that allows you to digest your food. That's when we see things like small intestine bacterial overgrowth and leaky gut. So it is, again, it all kind of centers around this chronic stress and the way that chronic stress impacts your body. You know, cortisol is offset by melatonin. So as your cortisol, it increases fairly early in the day, and then it kind of like tapers down. It's like a nice, slow, lazy little hill if you're going to go sledding on. But as that tapers down, your melatonin ramps up in response for nighttime and for going to sleep. If that's out of whack, that's going to affect your digestion. It's going to affect your sleep. It's going to affect, you know, your day-to-day stress levels. It's going to affect your reactivity. You might be more short-tempered. You're not going to have access to all of your brain functionality because you are in that kind of fight, flight, freeze, fawn mode. So it really does impact everything.
100%. That's so powerful and so important. And it just brings it back to the point as to why we need to look after ourselves. And just because we're creating that life that we love and we're doing what we love doesn't mean that we need to be doing it 24/7. And I guess it kind of comes back to that whole idea of creating boundaries for ourselves as well, isn't it? Which is easier said than done when you're working for yourself and your house is your, you know, it is your workplace as well. But I guess I know that we're going to be talking about in a little bit what we can do if we feel burnt out. But I know that one of the things that you are super passionate about is actually preventing the burnout before we even get there. So before we talk about, well, if we are feeling burnt out, what can I do about that? What kind of things would you suggest for anybody who, well, before they get to that stage of burnout, anybody who's thinking, right, this is what I'm doing. I'm doing my digital business, my online business, or any kind of business. What kind of things would you suggest to people to prevent them from getting to a stage of burnout?
So I'm glad that we're going to be making this distinction because a lot of the tools that we use for burnout prevention are not good for burnout recovery. And the nice thing about burnout prevention is we already have a lot of tools for burnout prevention. So usually when you see, you know, if you go on like Thrive Global or Medium or something like that, and you look at articles about burnout, they'll say meditate, exercise, eat fairly cleanly, spend time in nature, do a gratitude journal. Those are all things that are great as preventative measures, because if you're not already burnt out and feeling really like, you know, pulled like taffy and scattered and everything like that, you may have slightly better boundaries in place. And you can say, okay, I'm going to make a 15-minute block of time for meditation in the morning. And then I'm going to journal for 15 minutes after that. And the action of doing that fills you up. It feels good. Meditation's not always easy, but setting aside the 15 minutes to do it, and whether it feels really good that day or whether it's more of a challenge that day, it's always something that you feel good doing, and it doesn't take more energy out of you in order to do it. So those things are really useful. And if people are kind of just at the point where they're starting their business or their course, I will do this for people for burnout prevention and for burnout recovery. Is a values exercise can be really useful because it lets you know where you want to put your energy. It lets you know, we think that we know what's important to us, but until it's actually like splatted down on a paper and we have the opportunity to pick through it, what you value may surprise you. The first time that I did a values exercise, one of the values that came up for me was curiosity. And I didn't realize that that was something that was so important to me at the core of who I am. Looking back throughout my life and some of the very good and also some very questionable decisions that I made, all of that was born out of curiosity. And I have a very interesting and rich life as a result of that, but I wouldn't have identified that if it hadn't been for that exercise. So doing a values exercise lets you know in no uncertain terms what's important to you, and it allows you to build boundaries around that. So if you are working from home and you've got a course that you're getting ready to put together or launch or something, and you go through your values exercise and you identify quality time with family as one of your values, like sit and think about that. And I can, give you a link if your listeners want access to this. My coach does a great values exercise that I recommend for people because I don't believe in reinventing the wheel, and she already made a really great resource.
No, that'd be brilliant. And we'll pop it in the show notes as well.
Definitely.
So yeah, that'll be fantastic for people to check out afterwards. Thank you.
Yeah. So she does that. And what I like about hers is that she actually has an action statement with it. So once you identify quality time with family as one of your values, what are you going to do to bring that to fruition in your life? It's nice to know the value, but how is that going to actually manifest itself in your day to day? So if you sit and you think about it and you decide, I want to have a home cooked meal with my family 4 out of 7 nights a week. The other 3 nights we can get takeout. Maybe the kids go to a friend's house. Maybe I go out with my girlfriends. Those are freebies, but 4 nights a week, doesn't matter which 4. I want to have dinner with my family and I want it to be home cooked. And that by the time everybody gets home, you want to sit down at 6 p.m. to have that dinner. That you need to stop work by 4:30 on those days. And it sets that boundary for you. So there's not going to be any time where you're just like, I'm going to push it to 4:45. I'm going to push it to 5 o'clock. Those nights are nights at home with your family. And so you don't have to wonder. There's no ambiguity there. So values exercise, regardless of whether you're in prevention or recovery, is, I think, critical because it just allows you to be very clear about who you are as a person. And it's much easier to do that in all aspects of your life, whether it's your home life, your, friend life, your business. It creates a lot of clarity for people. So that's one thing that I would add to the prevention pile that we don't already have. Aside from that, regular activity, regular exposure to sunlight, living as best you can within the rhythms of nature. I'm not naturally a morning person. It's taken me a couple of years through burnout recovery to get to a point where I don't use blackout curtains every day. And I kind of just let the light filter in and let myself wake up normally. But it took me a few years to get there. So doing things like that for prevention can be really, really huge.
I think that's so important. It's like you said, I think we talk in society so much about cures and about what we can do when we reach a certain point. But as you said, just finding 15 minutes. And I know that a lot of people are probably thinking, oh my gosh, where are we going to find 15 minutes in the day? But it's like you've got another 23 hours and 45 minutes of the day left. So yeah, just finding that, that 15 minutes to just do something. And I love what you said as well about doing this values exercise. And like I said, we'll link that down in the show notes for people to have a look at, and finding out more about yourself. And because I think sometimes we don't consider our own values enough and consider how those are actually impacting on what's potentially putting us on a road to burnout or a range of other bits and pieces. So I think that's so important to just recognize in ourselves what's important to us and how are we going to prioritize that. Because yes, our businesses are important because we all need an income, we all need to pay rent or mortgages and fill the fridge up and whatever, but at the end of the day, we're not going to eat the food in our fridge if we're not going to enjoy it and all the rest of it. So I think that's so powerful and so important what you're saying there. So thank you so much for sharing that information with us. And I guess that leads us on really nicely then to the next question that I've got for you. Is there's probably going to be people listening to the podcast right now being like, oh, I really should have started my journaling or my going for walks or, whatever strategy works for them. I should have already started it. But actually, I'm now at a point where I feel burnt out. I am, all those symptoms that you said before, I'm not enjoying things. I'm stressed all the time. I can't sleep properly, or I am sleeping, but it's not quality sleep. I'm, not enjoying my food, whatever it is that relates to them. If people are at that point where they're thinking I'm burnt out, or I'm just on the cusp, of being burnt out, what would your advice to them be? Or are there any strategies that you could kind of maybe recommend?
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny when you had mentioned that, like, there are people out there saying like, oh, I should have started this 15-minute thing and I haven't yet. Those are the people that are burnt out. If you feel like you don't have 15 minutes in the day, that is burnout of just like, I can't take 15 minutes for myself. Congratulations, friend. You're there. Welcome. The water's fine. There's a lot of us. It's a good community. There's a lot of people to support you. So if you are feeling burnt out, the best advice that I can give to start is take very, 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 very bite-sized steps to start your recovery. I cannot stress that enough, because trying to do too much when you're burnt out is a one-way ticket to more burnout and more overwhelm. And there is a natural impulse with a lot of people who are burnt out to believe that they can hack it themselves. I can hack this. I can figure it. I can read the books. I can do the thing. And books are very helpful. Podcasts are very helpful. Guided meditations are very helpful. But having a community can be really useful. So you can look for, communities on Instagram. If you follow hashtags like End Burnout Culture, hashtag Burnout Recovery. My coach, Kate Donovan, who's also a colleague of mine now, since I'm in the burnout realm, she has a podcast as well. And she has a Facebook group that's associated with that podcast that is full of people who are burnt out looking for community. So look for resources outside of yourself. Don't just try and do this on your own. And if you're looking for specific like tips or tricks to kind of introduce the burnout recovery process, start incredibly small. So don't try and do a 15-minute meditation, guided or otherwise, because burnt out brains actually shrink. They get smaller and they can grow back, but it takes time to do that. So when your brain has shrunk a little bit because of stress and the left and right sides aren't talking quite as nicely as we normally want them to, smaller, more incremental, more digestible activities are the things that are going to be more meaningful for you. So instead of trying to meditate for 15 minutes, take 4 deep breaths over the course of 1 minute and do that a couple times a day. And that's it. Don't put any more pressure on yourself to do anything aside from that. A lot of people in burnout, and this absolutely applied to me, have absolutely terrible exercise recovery. So either you're very prone to injuries with very light minor exercise, or you're just so tired after exercising because your body is so depleted that it doesn't feel good. Like you don't get the runner's high. You come home and you need to take a nap. So instead of exercising for 5 minutes or, 15 minutes or a half an hour or anything like that, do a yoga nidra. Yoga nidra is actually something that you do just lying down. So it sounds weird to say that it's exercise, but it's very, very good for helping your brain recover and regenerate. So if at night you've got, opportunity to lay in bed and pop some headphones in, you can go onto a site like Insight Timer or Calm, the meditation app, and look for yoga nidras and do that. Or, do some light yin yoga for a few minutes. Don't try and go for a half an hour walk. Just go stand out in the sun for 2 minutes, 5 minutes if you've got the time, and just get a little bit of vitamin D. So the smaller you start and do that very gently and very incrementally, that will be a way in which your body learns to feel safe again. Because the thing about that chronic stress is it does keep it in that very tight, clenched fight or flight. And when we're in that long enough, moments of calm and rest and gratitude actually don't feel good and don't feel safe. It feels like, oh God, when is the shoe going to drop? What's going to happen next? So giving your body and your brain incredibly small spaces in which to exist safely over time will help you get to a point where you can start to recover and do a 5-minute guided meditation, which you eventually work up to a 10-minute guided meditation, which eventually works to 10 minutes of meditating with maybe just some music on, and you don't need the guide anymore. But it's working yourself up to that point, not trying to jump into the deep end of the pool when you don't have floaties on.
And I think that's amazing advice. Thank you so much for sharing that, because one of the things I jotted down whilst you were saying that is that I feel that a lot of people will be experiencing symptoms of burnout, what have you, and then their solution to that will be, well, I'm going to take tomorrow off, or I'm not going to do anything for the weekend. But as you're saying, that's actually going to be quite converse to what they're trying to achieve. They're thinking, oh, I'll take the day off and I'll come back on Monday or whatever the next day is. But like you said, that's not actually helping them, because they're not going to recover in that way. So I think that's so important to remember that you've got to do it in, well, like you said, in those manageable chunks, which is manageable for your brain, because it's remembering that.
And it can be very isolating and very lonely. And burnout recovery is not something you are supposed to do alone. We are, as Brene Brown says, we are neurobiologically hardwired for connection. So we cannot do anything meaningful or successful, largely speaking, in the absence of community. So if you are feeling like this, please definitely reach out to me. You can DM me on Instagram and I will point you to resources that can help you, or I will help you find the right people, because I'm not the right fit for everybody. Not everybody likes the burnout witch kind of brand of who I am, but I know a lot of really amazing people who might be a really good fit for you. So, it's almost a little bit like finding a therapist. It's like the first one might not be the right one, but if you just stick with it, you can find stuff that will work for you. I've got a couple of meditations on Insight Timer that can be really useful for people, and I can give you the links for that as well. So, start with those types of things and really don't try to do it alone.
100%. I think it's so important about any kind of recovery, just not trying to do it by yourself. But thank you for sharing about the about your links, and we'll stick all that down in the show notes as well. And I just wanted to touch on what you said about imperfection, because the episode prior to this one I did was all about imposter syndrome and, seeking this kind of perfect, quote unquote, perfect reality that we need to put out there. And it's one of those things that the more you try to be perfect, the more you're just setting yourself up for failure. And in my opinion, putting yourself on that road to burnout, really. And it's kind of, the more you talk to people, the more you realize that there is no perfection. We're all striving for this perfection, but none of us really know what this perfection is. And we're never going to really achieve it, because I guess this comes back to what you were saying about this values exercise, because we all have a different idea of perfection. For some people, their perfect business is making 6 figures every year. Other people, it's those 4 nights a week that they can spend with their family, as you said. And for other people, it's not working a 9 to 5, but they're able to, take that time for meditation in the morning. And other people, their perfection is actually working the 9 to 5. I think I'm actually going to go off and do this values exercise, because I think I'm going to learn a lot about myself, and I'm going to be really intrigued to see what I learn about myself. And I might actually even get you back on the podcast. Actually,
I would love it.
Can you come back on the podcast and we'll talk about whatever I come up with?
Definitely.
Really excited.
Yes, that sounds like so much fun. And I love that you did an episode on imposter syndrome and that you're talking about kind of perfection in this way, because to me, perfectionism, as a recovering perfectionist myself, which is one of the big things about my own story that got me burnt out, perfectionism in my life is the opposite of authenticity. And if you are going to be creating a business, if you're going to be creating a course, I think the best thing that you can be is authentic, which requires you to be imperfect. And that is going to be what is more meaningful for people, to know that you're real. And so when we talk about burnout recovery and recovering from this state of like intensive chronic stress, we're not telling you that you're never going to be stressed again. Like life, I don't mean to sound like a nihilist, but like life is stress. So, that's where growth is. Flowers and plants don't come out of the ground, just like pop out, like they push up against dirt in order to grow stronger, so that they have the fortitude to stand tall when they get high and they meet the wind. So this idea of perfectionism is the opposite of authenticity, is something that helped me as an individual, because I can show up on days when I don't feel 100% and it's still okay. As I started to show up more authentically in my business and come on, not when I'm having a 5-alarm meltdown, but say like, I was stressed today. For me this morning, my morning meditation sucked. Like every time he was like, breathe in gratitude, I was like, I want to throat punch you. It was not easy for me to sit through that for 15 minutes this morning, but I did it. And I'm glad that I did, because I had those moments of, I'm struggling with gratitude right now. And that's authentic. That's real. That's me. And it's a moment. It's not who I am. It's just something that's kind of layered on me right now. And it's going to change when I leave the house or do something different. So being authentic, I think, is so much more important than being perfect. So it's awesome that you're talking about that, because it's something that is wrapped so heavily into the world of burnout that it's really important to know.
Definitely. And I think that's just completely cemented what I said before. We need to do another episode around authenticity, because I think particularly in the digital space, in the online course markets, it's everybody is striving for perfection. I have to create the best webinar, the best online course. And most of the time people, your audience, they're showing up for you. They're not showing up for, I don't know, the most amazing course in the world. Yes, we all want to put that out there, but they're showing up for you and your authentic self. And yeah, we definitely need to do an episode on that in the
Oh, yeah.
future. So
Yeah,
if
absolutely.
and if people are interested in that, please stick a comment or DM me or whatever and on Instagram, and we will definitely get that set up. That's so exciting. Well, I just want to thank you so much for your time. It has been so helpful. I'm sure for a lot of people. I've learned a lot in the last half an hour or 40 minutes that we've been talking. And I've learned so much. And I think that there has been so much value, so many things that I'm going to go and create and steal what you said and create Instagram posts around it, because honestly, so much value. So just thank you so much for your time. As I said, I'm going to, in the show notes, we'll stick all of those links, those Instagram hashtags that you were talking about as well. Yeah, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I always appreciate a platform to talk about burnout recovery because it's such an important topic. So I'm really, really thrilled to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I really hope you've enjoyed this episode of Bloggers Creating Courses. Personally, I have found it so useful to speak to Elizabeth Collins about burnout, and I hope that you've been able to take away some nuggets of information which will be useful for you as well. If you've enjoyed this episode, please leave me a review in Apple Podcasts or whichever podcast platform you're using to listen to this podcast right now. I love listening to your reviews. I love reading your reviews because they tell me what you're liking about the podcast and things that you'd like to include in future episodes. I'll see you next time, guys. Happy content creating.